Hey rockers, welcome back to the channel. I just got back, well, several hours ago from urgent care, man. You can hear this congested sound in my head. Well, I've had a head cold, man, that won't go away for about a month, if not more. And I had it before that for another month, and it went away, for a few weeks. Man, it's a nightmare. So I went to urgent care today, and they hooked me up with a couple of different types of antibiotics. So I get those tomorrow, and I can't wait to get the antibiotics because nothing else has worked. And I've tried probably a million different things from a million different people's giving me ideas. Thank you to everybody that tried to help me. But yeah, man, it's been bad. So, but I got a story to tell, even though I do sound like Bob Dylan imitating somebody else that sounds like Bob Dylan. But anyway, I got that whole, hey man, it's me, Bloody. I sound like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Anyway, tonight I'm going to talk about the craziest person that I ever knew. The craziest friend I ever had. You might say, oh, that would be G.G. Allen. Nope, not at all. I've had quite a few crazier friends than G.G. Allen, quite frankly. But that's like stupid. It's like comparing apples to oranges, right? There's nothing to compare there, so why am I even doing that? But I'm going to talk about a guy named Rick Grant. And I made notes, so I might have to refer to these notes because there's a lot to talk about. So, hey, think about subscribing to the channel. Maybe give it a like if you like the story and leave a comment if you want to. It's great to be here again, and we're going to go down memory lane, one of these personal stories. We're going back to like the early 1980s, 1980, 81, 82, that whole era, 2-year period, right? Rick Grant is one of these guys that was, well, he was 10 years older than me, which he did have that in common with G.G. Allen. He was exactly 10 years old, born in the summer of 1956 he was. I first started seeing Rick Grant probably in about 1979 when I was about 13. I was a little long-haired. I still hadn't smoked weed yet kind of kid. I hadn't drank. I was innocent. I was 13, I was into rock and roll, I was into books, and I'd be going to school, walking around the neighborhood, and I'd always see this long-haired guy, right? Really long, scraggly hair, big scraggly beard. He would always have his thick glasses on that were like black outlined glasses, like really nerdy type glasses, very thick lenses. And he always had like at least one cross around his neck, if not a bunch of them. Sometimes he'd have like a whole bunch of crosses. And he would walk around with his arms outstretched, screaming at the sky, saying that he was Jesus and talking about Jesus, talking about how he was God. Other times he would be talking to God. And everyone in this neighborhood in Rolling Acres subdivision in Peoria, Illinois, kind of knew who Rick Grant was back in 1979, 1980. He was a force, man. This guy was a trip. He was really crazy. Like, I'm not sitting here trying to make fun of mental illness. I would never do that. I have a lot of friends, and myself, I suffer from some emotional issues, right? But I have a lot of friends that suffer with mental illness. So the point of this story is not to pick on people that have a mental illness, man. It's to tell you about Rick Grant. Because though he had mental illness, and many of them, he was just kind of an evil boy, kind of like an evil boy. But he was 10 years older than me, like I said. I found out later that he was literally known in the court system, because he was in the system a lot in Illinois. He was known as Beelzebub and Lucifer. And you're going to find out why they called him that, like, really soon here. The guy was often incoherent. He was delusional, always drunk, rambling, and he was something else to remember, man. Rick would often buy the booze and the beer for the teenage punks and the neighborhood kids like me. There was always that guy that was 21 or over that would always go by, if you'd give them some booze or some money. Well, Rick Grant was one of those guys. He had zero morals. He didn't care about anything like morals. And he would buy for all of us teenagers, including me, pay him a few bucks or buy him a bottle of cheap wine or, a 40 ounce or a beer or something like that. He would buy whatever you wanted. So you could always go to Rick Grant, but he was always a nightmare to deal with because he was just so out there, right? Rick Grant, man. Yeah, he lived in the Rolling Acre subdivision in his parents' house, right? His parents lived there with his brother Steve, I believe his name was. And basically, I ended up befriending Rick. Within about a year of, like, I seen him around a lot by the time I was 13, 14, changing in about 14 years old. I basically started becoming friends with Rick, and I was for about a year. And it was a very intense year, and I made some bad choices, man. But I was just around 14 when we started kind of seeing each other. I'd have him buy booze for me, and it was pretty crazy how it all started. But I decided to get to know this guy. I wanted to know what he really thought. What was his trip? What was his delusion? Like, what's his problem? Or what is he seeing up there in the sky when he's out there screaming all the time? And Rick ended up taking me to like his house and stuff. And all of a sudden, you know, people were like, "You're friends with Rick Grant?" But we'd go to his parents' house and they were never around, right? And when his mom was around, she unfortunately suffered from a mental illness too. But they had this whole downstairs that was finished, and had a kick-ass TV and a pool table and a big couch. It was like a leather upholstered couch, right? And we would sit down there and watch MTV and just smoke bongs and drink and drink and drink and party and listen to records. And he had a lot of good records that I liked, but Rick was really crazy, man. He would sit there and smoke in his pipe, like an old man pipe, and he would smoke this tobacco in it, and it just always reeked of that tobacco down there in the basement. But yeah, he took me to his house, and yeah, MTV was a big deal for us because we were all into rock and roll, and MTV was kind of a thing that was big, 80 to 83 or whatever, 4 when I was watching it. And we would just watch it all the time. That was what we do, smoke out and party, play pool, and watch MTV in Rick's basement. This was like for about a year, right? And that was kind of my deal. He lived about 6 blocks away from my house, my parents' house. Rick gave me a bunch of records, turned me on to a bunch of music I'd never heard before. And then we met a guy that went to high school with me. The guy that I always saw around. I started kind of getting to know him at high school, and he was kind of a crazy guy too. He had a big attitude problem a lot. He liked to fight. He rode a motorcycle, and his name was Clay Alan Banker. Yeah, but we called him Alan. So this story is primarily about, right now, Rick Grant and Alan Banker, right? And Alan Banker, as I flip over my notes, he had a very violent, volatile relationship with his parents. Basically, as a kid, Alan Banker's parents used to like beat him. His dad physically would beat this kid a lot, and his mom was very cruel. Well, then little Alan, who was small and shy and just let himself be bullied by his parents as a kid, he kind of grew up. He wasn't like a very tall guy, but he grew up in stature in many ways. Like, he became a fighter. He became very, very angry that he was able to, physically overcome his parents now. And he had this chip on his shoulder a mile long, right? And Alan Banker, man, he would often get into like physical altercations with his parents. It was kind of nasty stuff to watch, man. He was physically hurt, his parents, like not brutally, but enough to where I would wince and think, God, I can't believe this guy's relationship with his parents. Mine wasn't like that with my mother. My father certainly wasn't there, but my mother was awesome. But this guy, his parents were just a trip. His dad was a kind of shriveled up old man that you could tell that in the old days was probably a mean guy, right? And his mom was just really mean, just cold and kind of a very mean lady. But anyway, their relationship was horrible. Alan rode around the neighborhood all the time on a motorcycle with like a jean jacket on and an attitude. And we started partying, me and him and Rick Grant. So you got this weird couple of us three, but more of Alan Banker pretty soon here in the story. Rick Grant, man, he was schizophrenic, he was bipolar, manic depressive, he had multiple personality disorder, and that's the best I can describe it as far as details about what, kind of doesn't make him a bad guy because he had all these things, but he kind of was a bad guy, man. He was a pretty damn bad guy. He was either didn't take his meds or he just didn't care, but he just chose not to care. There was a lot of police. I read a lot of articles about Rick recently doing some research, and there's a lot of cops that said he was just completely mental. Other ones that said, no, this guy totally knew what he was doing and he got off on, being mean. So I don't know, but Rick was crazy, very crazy, man. Like, he walked around looking like Jesus. His neighbors were afraid of him. His mother, again, had these same issues. Rick Grant and his mom would both end up in Zeller Zone, which was the local mental hospital in Peoria, Illinois. And I would often go visit both of them separately, together. Like, I'd go visit Rick's mom with Rick. I'd go visit, Rick Grant with his mom. It was pretty crazy, man. And I remember going to see his mom in there, and there was some lady sitting at a table next to the one we were sitting at, and she had a full dinner plate and dinner. She had like a plate, fork, knife, spoon, and a glass and a napkin. But that was also in front of her too, like she was sitting in there having dinner with somebody, and she was carrying on a full conversation and literally having dinner alone. But she was the best actress on earth because she was out of it and stuff. But that place was intense. It was a locked ward mental facility, so these people couldn't leave once they were put in there. They had to be treated for a certain amount of time until like a judge could say, "You're out." Well, Rick Grant, he was in Zeller a lot, locked up a lot in the crazy house, man. He just was. And so I'd go visit him there, and it was pretty wild, man. And then, Rick started telling me a lot of sordid stuff about his parents, man, like just gross sexual stuff about his parents and how he would hear them and stuff they were into and a lot of stuff that I really didn't want to hear. And it was just wild. I started seeing the dynamics of this family, and it was really weird, man, and that these people were all the way they were. And I was just like, wow. And I was literally friends with Rick. I had compassion for the guy, but I was starting to see as that year went by that he was more dangerous than I thought. He just would go off, would literally just say and do the craziest stuff on earth. He would just go into hallucinatory stuff. He'd be drunk and just, threaten people. But basically, I got sick of hearing about it. I kind of stopped hanging out with him as much. But Alan Banker, back to Alan Banker, right? He and I and Rick, for a while, we all started hanging out. We were all total alcoholics. We just didn't fit in. And we were all black sheep that kind of found each other. A total weird couple, threesome of friends that were weird because Alan kind of didn't really like me. He had a chip on his shoulder sort of about me. Him and I got in fist fights a couple of times. There was a little bit of time when Alan Banker was so psycho that he would get drunk for a period of time and come outside my bedroom window where I lived at my parents' house still in like 1981, 82. And he would knock on the window outside and like tell me to come outside and use weird voices and try to entice me to come out to fight him. Just psycho. And I'd be like, if I was maybe drunk like you are, I'd come out and I'd go toe to toe with you, Alan, but not while you're intoxicated and I'm not. So I would just tell him to go away. But it started spooking me. Both these guys did. I was like, these guys are literally all mentally ill, and bless their hearts, man, because they couldn't help it. And I myself had more emotional kind of like issues that I was dealing with in life, but not really something I couldn't turn off. These guys kind of had a faucet that wouldn't turn off, if you know what I'm saying, without trying to sound mean or judgmental of these guys. Just trying to describe how intense they were, man, really. But alcohol took me down. I really did. I admit that. I intend to never live that life again. But back then, at age 15, 16, I'd already been arrested so many times for so many alcohol-related incidences, and it was crazy, man. I had real long hair. By the time I was 14, I had been shaven for a couple of years, and I was able to grow a mustache and a light beard if I wanted. And I had my hair that was about the length that it is now. And just didn't fit in, man. So we all hung out together. It was weird. Like I said, I don't think Alan really cared for Rick because he was so crazy, but we had somewhere to party. We had Rick's basement. We had MTV. We had a pool table, and Rick could buy booze for us anytime, right? So we partied down there a lot. We went to a lot of parties also. We would just get into some crazy situations, man. Like I say, Alan was a certifiable nut, man. But Rick was very much crazy and got crazier and crazier. Neither one of these guys really had friends. I had other friends. I had circles of friends that I could go hang out with or call in different parts of town. I was like a year away from being a punk singer, a year and a half maybe. And, I was hanging out with this motley crew of dudes that were just pretty bad, man. We were all pretty bad at the time. We would drink a lot of hard liquor, like whiskey and Mad Dog and stuff that would just make you black out. And we all did quite often. And it was pretty crazy, man. At this time, I'm getting into this story. It was basically Rick Grant was 26 years old. Alan Banker was 17 and I was 16, right? Rick Grant, so intense, man. First time that guy was arrested was 1976 at the age of 20 for setting fire to a business in Peoria. When the cops found him, he tried to go out by police-assisted suicide, if you know what I mean. He literally, I think he pulled some kind of weapon, like a bow and arrow on the police, and the cops literally pointed a gun with a laser that was right on his forehead, a red laser dot on his forehead, and all they had to do was press the trigger. So Rick dropped the bow and arrow. I guess in one of the articles I read, he said, quote unquote, I don't want to go out this way. But he was at first trying to force them to take him out, and then he decided he didn't want that. So didn't want to take a bullet. You know what I'm saying? He didn't want to take a bullet, man. But yeah, he did a lot of very crazy stuff when I knew him, man. He was always in the paper, always getting popped, getting picked up, going to the mental hospital. There's so many articles I found earlier tonight online from the Peoria Journal-Star about Rick Grant. And some of that intense information I'm going to share with you here in a second, man. Rick's neighbors were all really afraid of him, man. He'd just get wasted and walk around screaming as like he was Jesus or screaming at Jesus. And basically, he would smoke weed out of his old man pipe and walk around. His eyes were dead. Like when you looked in his eyes, they were just kind of dead. And we would just get wasted to the point of blacking out so often that I started getting weird vibes about Rick, I didn't hang out there quite as much. And when I did, I stopped kind of drinking there. Basically, I just started getting bad vibes, man. And this is about the time that I got my first real job, right? My first real job. My Aunt Peggy got me a job at a place in Peoria, Illinois called the Creve Coeur Club, which was a private, members-only restaurant, like presidents and governors and senators would eat, like a super expensive place for like real rich, mostly political people. It was weird, but I had to wear like a bow tie, and it was like 1982 according to my notes. Anyway, at that time I had gotten in so much trouble with the law that I'd been on probation many times, and I literally was always this close of getting sent somewhere I shouldn't get sent. To like, they called it the Big House, which was St. Charles, which is where they filmed the movie Bad Boys that Sean Penn was in. I was always this close to going there, but my probation officers, they always took pity on me. They always said, this guy, he knows a lot about music. He talks, he's cool, he's diverse, he's articulate. And these other guys, a lot of them were gang members with tattoos on their faces and hands, and not really their faces so much back then. But, they were just gang dudes that you can tell were in gangs. And I wasn't. I was more into rock and roll and partying, which was stupid, but I was into drinking. So these guys took pity on me, but I had to get a job as part of my probation, and my Aunt Peggy came through, got me this job. I had to cut my damn hair. So I did, and I had to grow a little mustache, and I had to wear like this tuxedo-like outfit, right, to have this job. And I was like bussing tables and like a waiter and stuff. And check it out. This is a picture I found from that job in 1982, man. Look how goofy I look. Woohoo! Yep, that's me, 16 years old, man. Working for the Creve Coeur Club, and that's what I had to wear to work, man. Isn't that crazy? I couldn't believe I found that photo. I have hardly any photos left, but I had that one in my bag of photos I found. So I had the job. It's 1982. One late afternoon, I was at Rick's, hanging out in the basement. We were smoking weed. Those guys were drinking. It was Alan Banker, Rick Grant, and me. We're all drinking. We were all three smoking weed. We were playing pool, watching MTV, having a good time, man. And all of a sudden, the phone rang. And on the other end of the phone line was my mom. So somebody called on to Rick and said, hey, tell him his mom's on the phone. I'm like, uh-oh, what did I do? What's up? Why is she calling? And she says, hey, your aunt called, and somebody called off at the Creve Coeur Club, and they need you to come in to work. So I was like, damn, man, I don't want to leave. I was just having a good time, but I needed the bread. And, my aunt got me the job. I wasn't going to not go to work and, let her down or whatever, right? So I go home real quick, I'm all smoked out, of course. It's 4:20 in my head. I go home and get dressed up in my little gear that I'm wearing, as you see in that photo. Go to work for about 2 hours. It's real busy. And then all of a sudden, the place was dead, right? And I'm like, wow, that sucks. I only had to work for 2 hours. So I'm standing around, taking a break. I decided to call Rick Grant's house to see what him and Alan were up to. I was going to maybe go there after work and drink with them. Well, when I called Rick Grant's house, guess who answered? The police. Yep. Now, it might have been a detective, but it was a cop or a policeman, and they asked me who I was, and they wouldn't tell me why they were there. I could hear activity in the background. I could hear beeping of other CB or antennas or radios, whatever, and I could tell there was something wrong, very wrong, and it was very bizarre, man. I knew something was very wrong, and I finished my shift wondering what in the heck is the deal, man. Why wouldn't that guy tell me what's up? Why did a cop answer the phone? God, it's only been a couple hours. What the hell's going on at his house, So when I go home, my stepfather picks me up. I didn't have a driver's license yet. Stepdad picks me up. I go home. My mom says, look, I want you to sit down. I have something really sad and bad to tell you. And I'm like, it's something to do with Rick Grant and Alan, isn't it? And she goes, how do you know? I said, well, I told her the story about being there earlier, smoking out with them, and how I went to work, and I was trying to call there from work, and the cops answered. Well, my mom said, well, we were watching the news about an hour ago, and basically we saw your friend Alan get taken out of Rick Grant's house in a body bag. Yeah, a freaking body bag, man, like on a stretcher, covered up. The guy was deceased. So I was like, what in the hell is going on? What's the story? And she's like, I don't know, but your friend Rick Grant is now in custody. And I don't know if he did it or what's going on. I'm like, well, there was only those two guys there when I left. So what happened, I wonder? And I was just completely freaking out, man. This was November 26th, 1982. Of course, later that night, I waited till the news was back on, and then I got to see the same footage. It was shocking. It was crazy to watch Alan being taken out on that stretcher. And they said Rick was in custody and the suspected as the murderer in the case. And I was like, holy shit, what did he do? Like, what do you mean? I was speechless. I was completely freaking out because I would have been over there like an hour or two later. What if whatever happened would have transpired just a little while later, or when I was there earlier? And it was pretty crazy, man. But basically, Rick and Alan were partying when I was gone, working. They were watching MTV, playing pool. And according to the article in the Period Journal Star, Rick Grant told them that Alan said before he died that he'd like to fight in a war and he was not afraid of dying. And then according to Rick Grant, he ran upstairs himself, returning with a .45 caliber pistol. And yeah, Rick Grant basically pointed it right at our friend Alan Banker and blasted him right in the chest. He told the police, man, he told the police later that he thought the gun was unloaded, okay? But that's not what he told me, man. Later on, after he got out of prison later, which I'll tell you about, he told me God told him to do it. Because I always ask him, why did you kill our friend Alan, man? And he used to say that to me in the letters from prison, too, because I started writing when he went to prison, but I'm kind of skipping ahead now. But that was his story to me. God told me to do it. And I was just flabbergasted, man. It was completely shocking. It was bizarre. He was charged with murder, and he told the police again he thought the gun was unloaded. Later on, after he got out of prison, again, he kept keeping to the same narrative. The guy was sentenced to 12 years in prison for the death of Alan. However, I think he only served about 6 years because you get like half time, or you used to in Illinois. Yeah, he did 6 years. That was it, man. While he got out, back up. While he was in, I started writing to him. It wasn't a regular thing. I wrote to him for a little while, just, I don't know, the first year he was there, just to kind of say, why? Why did you do it, bro? What's your deal? I know you're crazy, you're batshit nuts, but why did you kill him? And he just kept sticking to the narrative, so I stopped writing him after a while. But while he was in there, he kept telling me all these crazy stories, really delusional, off the wall, like 3-4 page letters about how there's all these hermaphrodites in prison and how I'd be surprised at all the hermaphrodites. And he was obsessed with hermaphrodites. He would write about them, and then once in a while he would call me collect from prison and he would talk about hermaphrodites. It was completely off the rails nuts, man. Very nuts. Let's see, he wasn't really around for me to be around him much longer because I knew that he's not somebody I wanted to hang out with, man. But when he got out, man, he actually gave me a painting that he did in prison. And that painting was of a hermaphrodite. Yeah, and I had it for a long time and I lost it long ago. But yeah, that painting was very bizarre. It had some weird green colors, dark green and light green, and some yellows and reds. But it was like this hermaphrodite that was very shocking. And I had it on my wall for years, and people would always say, what in the hell is that? And then I'd have to tell them the story about Rick Grant, which I'm still trying to tell you guys. Flash forward to the year 1989. Rick does get out of prison. I called his parents' house on a whim. Me and my ex-girlfriend Angel at the time. Me and Angel decided to look up this guy that I kept telling her about that was so crazy. And sure enough, I think his brother or somebody told us that, he was out of prison. Here's his address. So me and Angel actually drove there, went to Rick Grant's house, knocked on the door, and when he saw me, he was like, oh my God, and he was like super happy to see me, and he looked more than ever like Jesus. Like the image you see of Jesus, you know what I'm saying? Really long hair, super long beard. He still had all these necklaces and a lot of crosses on his neck. and he just looked, he had big thick glasses as usual, and he just looked as crazy as ever, man. It was pretty intense to see Rick. He invited us in. He lived in this weird like trailer, like a double wide trailer. He invited us in. It was a real dark atmosphere in there, but he did have music. He was always into music. I think he had like it was either 8-track still or cassette tapes. It was cassette tapes that he was playing. And he liked my girlfriend, thought she was cool or whatever. But he was super intense. And she even said, man, this guy's nuts. I don't really want to hang out with this guy. But one day we went and picked him up and took him to the park. And we went walking through the park, Detweiler Park in Peoria, and it was a really intense trip, man. It was like a 2-hour hike or something, or 2-mile hike. And on that trip, he kept it together, but he was saying some of the wildest stuff, man. Again, talking about hermaphrodites and just angels and demons and blah, blah, blah. Well, we decided to stop hanging out with Rick. I'd had enough. He was just really bad. Until one day we were driving right by there. And I said, let's stop by and say hi to Rick and, bring him some weed or something. So we did. And when we got there, we were shocked to see that he was just completely haggard looking. He had this, he says, come on in. And when he opened his door, he had this thing right here on his arm, man, right here, that was just from here all the way to here, a big knotted, bright red, scarry, looks like somebody took a butcher knife to him. And we were completely flipping out. And my girlfriend's like, I want to leave, man. Look at his arm. She's like telling me, I want to leave. Look at his arm. And I looked at him, I go, man, what the freak happened to your arm, man? And he goes, well, man, I just got out of the hospital, man. I was in there for a couple weeks or whatever. And I go, what do you mean? Turns out he was in the regular hospital and the mental hospital. Well, he told me that God told him to fill the bathtub up with blood and bathe in the blood. And he did. Crazy, man. So I don't know how much blood he had in that bathtub. All I know is the visuals we got after hearing him say that were pretty gruesome. And to look at his arm was just completely horrifying, man. It really was bad. And he was at that point getting really bad. And he'd look you in the eye and kind of shake his head. And he was just out there. Almost to the point of we were afraid of him at this point, man, and anyone that's going to bathe in their own blood, okay, man, unless you're a freaking vampire. But he did that, and anyway, man, I ended up losing touch with Rick Grant. He was way more deranged and delusional and unbalanced and not in touch with reality that I can even possibly portray on this video. By the way, he set fire to his old house, yep. He set fire to his old house in 2012, again, or 2016. There was another house that he set on fire, his own house. Oh, and I have something else to tell you. By the way, right? When I went by his mom's house, or no, once we reconnected with Rick Grant before we stopped talking to him, he took us to his parents' house, the same house that Alan was taken out in. And we went down to that basement, and nothing had changed since that 6 years previous. Nothing, or 7 years at this point. And guess what? That leather little couch that was down there, there was a freaking bullet hole right in the middle where Alan was sitting. These people had left that same furniture down there just like it was. They never went down there, and they didn't even replace the couch. It was just sitting there with the bullet hole in it, man. And, they found the bullet. It went through the whole hem and out, whatever. But yeah, unbelievable, man. That was such a trip. I couldn't believe that bullet hole was there. According to newspaper articles, in about, I think, 92 or something, he had been arrested like 57 times. Oh, no, this was an article in the 2012s or 2013-ish, and they said he'd been arrested 57 times or more since 1992. And then from 1993 to 2010, Rick Grant spent a lot of time behind bars. He was arrested a lot. He had at least 24 sentences. He ended up having a history of shooting at children with bow and arrows with like double-edged blades. Really crazy stuff, like trying to hurt animals. I would read stuff in the paper constantly about Rick Grant, man, and I couldn't believe how out there he'd gotten. And why is this guy free? Why isn't he just behind, like in a mental unit forever? Because he's obviously a threat to society, man. It was not fun. It was only fun for about 1.5 years, 2 years when I was a stupid teenager. And I grew up quickly and realized, man, I was flirting with death and fire being around this dude for sure, man. My mom used to freak out because I brought him to my parents' house once or twice. And she's like, do not bring that psycho to my house again. And I apologized. It was a really stupid decision, but he was always nice to my mom, so that's cool at least. But she saw him walking around, you know, talking to Jesus with his arms in the air and walking around in the neighborhood for years. And she couldn't believe that I chose this guy to be friends with. But I was always just kind of drawn to, well, extreme people, I guess. And you live and learn, right, man? But there's a couple more notes about Rick Grant that I want to tell you about, man. The bow and arrows thing, I told you about that. Yeah, in 2012, he did burn down his own house. It also burned down a couple other garages. He, again, he got a couple of counts of arson. He was declared a danger to people and animals at that point. But they still had this guy on the streets, man. He was still free. And when the cops were asked, how come Rick Grant wasn't arrested after he burned down his house? The cop said, it's not illegal to burn down your house. Only if it has something to do with insurance fraud. You can burn down your house. It's not illegal. And so he wasn't even arrested. It was stupid. He did like 2 days in jail for that. Just ridiculous. But as I wrap up my story, Rick Grant died, I found out, in 2016, man. You can go on Google, and you can type in Rick Grant. And if you really want to see what he looks like, you'll see what Rick Grant looks like. Look up Rick Grant, you know, arson or something, 2016 or whatever it is. Peoria, Illinois. Yeah, 2016 is when he died. But you can also find pictures of him. And his obituary was pretty sad to read, man. He actually burned down his own house that he was living in. It was October 21st, 2016. They weren't able to prove that he burned down his own house, though. They said they just couldn't prove it. So I believe Rick definitely set that fire. I could be wrong, but he was an arsonist. He always set stuff on fire. I definitely think he did it, whether on purpose or not. I still think he set it, but it's not legal. Legally on paper, he didn't. When the fire occurred, his identity was only confirmed based on his medical and dental records because he was burned so badly. But the official cause of death was carbon monoxide poisoning from smoke inhalation. And on his obituary, it was sad, man. It said, he lived a hard and tormented life. Now he is free. Whew, hard and tormented, man. Whew. Yeah, rest in peace, Rick Grant. He was a tormented soul. Rest in peace to Alan Banker. What a crazy tale, man. You know, again, you can go on YouTube and I keep saying that. You can go on Google or DuckDuckGo or Jabiru or any search engine and you can probably find pictures of Rick Grant. He's a trip, man. If you see what he looks like, check out those eyes, man. Thanks for being here, man. Thanks for listening to my tale of decadence and insanity. I really pretty much downplayed my whole part back then, but man, we were some big drinkers, and I'm happy to be not on booze today. You know, I've had a few beers in the last year or so, literally a few. We're doing some gigs and whatnot, but that's not a path I'm going to tread again. Rock and roll, my friends. Be back soon. And by the way, I think I told you at the beginning that I got these antibiotics coming, and I might not do a video for a little bit because it's really hard to even talk, and my energy level sucks right now, man. But I'll be back soon with some more punk, rock, metal, or curveball tales. And thanks for being here. Please subscribe. Once again, cheers, man.